so we're going to dig right in. We've only got about 30 minutes, and this is a big topic to talk about, and hopefully we'll have some time for you all to ask your questions as well. So the main topic here, I think that everyone wants to hear about, is AI's ability to fight bias, promote equal opportunity. So you are on the front lines of this.
Yes.
So what public or private sector examples, do you find out there in talking with your clients are the most promising and exciting?
Certainly. We've really entered a new age, the AI age, and in terms of equal employment opportunity and making sure that everyone gets to be a part of that, that's something that HR professionals, EEO professionals need to look at, both in the private and public sector. I know government regulators will be looking at it. They already are. But we called this AI's secret superpower because I think in the long run, and by long run in the AI world, that's not that many years. It could be in the next even months, but certainly in the next 3, 5, 10 years, I think you will see that AI will change the way we look at EEO in many ways. That the structure that we have now in this country goes back to the 1970s. And you have systems in place where you're looking for adverse impact, you're looking to see if there's basically under the 4/5 rule or using some sort of statistical analysis, whether there are disparities in hiring or promotions. And that framework remains here, but AI has the possibility of eliminating bias, like completely eliminating bias from the way that we look at employees, because it is neutral. And I think there's a lot of interest in government entities like the one I led, OFCCP or the EEOC, and you had Commissioner Sonderling here yesterday. He's also at the forefront of these issues. I think there's a lot of interest from federal regulatory agencies and state agencies in what AI can do. Having said that, there's a lot of skepticism as well. So, right now, your question, and I was the former OFCCP director, the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs. That's a federal agency that regulates federal contractors. Many of you are federal contractors. They use statistics to assess whether there's disparities based on race and gender in hiring and in pay, and was the first agency, and when I was director, to publish guidance on artificial intelligence in employment. And so, but I will tell you, both OFCCP and the EEOC are behind the times. There's a lot more guidance that they need to publish in this area because I saw a stat that said 95% of Fortune 500 companies are using AI already quite extensively in employment. And of course, Eightfold, we're here today to talk about artificial intelligence in Eightfold, and who has brought us together at Cultivate. Eightfold is a great example of that, the use of AI in employment to try to enhance equal employment opportunity. So you asked me what ways it's being used? In every way. AI is being used through chatbots to help an employee, determine what benefits would be best for them. It can be used to identify underutilized labor in your workforce where you could maybe give them an additional assignment that will be useful. It can tell you through looking at skills who might be a good person to promote into another position. And the big one, of course, is in employee selection. It can be used to identify, look at 10,000 resumes and determine who would be the best candidates for a particular position, helping you to use neutral criteria to identify the best talent. So it's being used a lot now. It's going to be used all the time in just a few years, I would say.
So you mentioned that various government institutions are a little bit behind the times with respect to regulations. How do you think policymakers assess and evaluate different types of AI that are popping up and determine when they should intervene?
Yes, so I'll tell you, and you probably know this, that you have the New York AI law, you have the EOC, who's published some guidance in the area of disability inclusion in AI. You have the OFCCP, which has indicated that it's looking at this area. You have the White House, which has taken sort of a whole of government approach, indicating that they're going to be looking at AI through numerous different agencies, and they want to publish guidance and regulations in this area. So, you do have a lot of activity at the federal and state level, but the point is that, in my view, even though there is a skepticism, healthy skepticism toward AI, because of the structures we have in place already and the concern that there will be, because of systemic racism and sexism in employment, that we still have not been able to eradicate as a society, There's a concern that AI could replicate or even enhance that. That's a concern. The idea that you might not be able to get a job anywhere because you're not on the right side of the algorithm, and that may impact people based on their race or gender in a way that's disproportionate or causes adverse impact. Those are legitimate concerns, but I will tell you, that concern exists today in terms of human decision making, unconscious bias, affinity bias, the way people look at resumes. How many times I know we train about this in HR and in EEO, but how many times does someone look at a resume and look at a hobby or look at the fact that they went to the same school and that's all they talk about in the interview and, oh, that person's a good fit? I mean, that happens more than we would like to admit. And AI doesn't do that. And that's
Right.
the benefit of AI. So as long as the federal regulators are interested in companies going in there, having AI ethics councils like Eightfold has, for example. I'm on the AI ethics council along with Vicki Libnick, who's the former acting chair of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. You want AI companies having an AI ethics council. Your own companies may want to have an AI ethics council, that you're considering AI, you're looking at the impacts of AI, you're making sure that it's not having a disparate impact based on race or gender. And assuming you do that, AI is going to be great for EEO because it can identify people based on their skills. Yeah. How much more job-related can you be than picking people based on their skills? And so even if there is an adverse impact in a given case, but it's based on skills, you'll be able to validate that. So there's, in the long run, in my view, AI is going to be a boon for equal employment opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, do you think it might be more likely that organizations in the near future who don't use AI will be more likely to be penalized? Because in using humans, they're going to be considered more likely to be biased?
I mean, I think it's a very astute point. I think anytime you bring in, you have human decision makers, which every organization has, of course. But anytime you don't use AI and you're only using humans and you have a disparity, what a regulatory agency like EEOC or OFCCP is going to consider is, oh, is this disparate treatment? Are you treating people differently because of their race, because of animus, because of historic discrimination, because of stereotypes and stigmas that exist, because of job segregation, that you think men are appropriate for these jobs and women are appropriate for those jobs? Antiquated thinking that is based on stereotypes. Regulators are very concerned about that. So if you're only using human decision makers, there's always that concern. But in terms of whether that will be soon or later, I don't know if in the next 6 months to a year, regulators are going to be saying, oh, you're not using AI, so that must mean that you're discriminating. But I do think, I'd say in 5 to 10 years, that if you're not using artificial intelligence as a significant part of your hiring process, that regulators are going to be concerned.
Yeah.
Because they know that the AI is neutral. Mm-hmm. Presumably by that time, the regulators will have put regulations in place. Mm-hmm. You won't be able to have AI that creates adverse impact or that is discriminatory in nature. And there's good AI and there's bad AI. Let's be clear about that. I'm on the AI Ethics Council for Eightfold. Eightfold to me is good AI, and it could be helpful in the long run. But there's bad AI too where they're not thinking about these things, and the AI itself may be relying on stereotypes and stigmas about who should be in a certain job based on historically who was in that job. That's not the AI you want, or AI where you can't explain why it's reaching a certain decision. Like if you ask it, well, why are women in this particular group, why are women being recommended for hire 60% of the time and men 80% of the time? Why is that gap there? You need the AI to be able to explain that to you. You need to be able to say, oh, well, it's because this particular skill was looked for, and the availability of that skill in this particular workforce happens to be there's more men who have that particular skill than women, or vice versa. You need to be able to have an AI that can tell you that. Mm-hmm. If not, you're going to get in trouble with the regulators.
Right. And to that point, I think it's important to understand, if you're looking at AI tools, some of the best practices for implementing an AI tool within an organization. So what would you consider to be some of those best practices?
Well, one, I would say that, and I'm speaking to the choir here, I think to some extent. You're all here, you're interested in AI. There's many companies that are afraid of AI right now because they're seeing this regulation, they're concerned about it, and maybe because of ChatGPT in particular and sort of generative AI are telling people in their organizations, hey, we don't want you using AI at all. We don't want you interacting on workplace computers with artificial intelligence. that's not going to work for that long.
Right.
Because as a business, you're going to have to be comfortable with AI to be competitive. You're just going to have to be. And if you want to compete for the best employees and compete with your fellow companies in your industry and get the best employees, you're going to need to employ AI to look through thousands of resumes and identify that top talent, which incidentally would also most likely, and I'm speaking here from an affirmative action standpoint, which OFCCP, that's the regulator of affirmative action in the United States, AI can help you identify underutilized talent. You asked me before, what are ways it can be used? There's diversity job boards where you can match underutilized talent, underrepresented groups with skills that they have that you're looking for, and that can help you in your affirmative action, your outreach and recruitment, and things like that. But ultimately, it will be able to help you compete for the best talent because you'll identify, you're not going to spend lots of time interviewing individuals who don't have the skills that are needed. You're going to be focused, laser focused on those that have those skills and be able to pick the best person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that it has so many points of value that we just need to take a step back and think about somebody said it in the last session, like what are the problems that we're trying to solve and just kind of hone in on the tools that are going to be appropriate for those to solve those specific problems. You mentioned a couple of minutes ago disparate impact and the fact that AI tools can be used for good and they can be used the other way. And one thing that just kind of always sticks in my mind is the fact that AI tools are by and large programmed by a very limited group of people who are, in a certain demographic, so that they might have this built-in bias associated with them. So an organization that's deploying AI tools has sort of a responsibility to ensure that the AI-based technologies that they're using are in fact neutral. So if you're an organization who is deploying an AI tool, how can you properly monitor your AI-based technology to ensure that the tool itself is not having a disparate impact?
Well, you need to be testing it. You need to be using common sense. So for example, and you probably need to audit it, or at least have the company that you're using that provides the AI be doing an audit and telling you the results of that. So for example, one concern in the AI world that I've seen among regulators is, let's say, and this is something I used to talk about at OFCCP quite a lot. There are certain fields where if you look at the higher level positions in those fields, and by fields I'm talking about law, finance, consulting, accounting, tenured faculty at universities, tech executives, where those executives are predominantly male, and often white males. And so
right.
80% male, 20% female. You see that in law firms even today. You look at the statistics that are published by they're called the NALP, N-A-L-P ethics survey. And what it tells you is that 80% of equity partners at law firms are men, 20% are women. Those numbers have been sticky over time, notwithstanding all the affirmative action efforts that have been done, notwithstanding the fact that over 50% of those graduating from law school are women, and about 50% of mid-level associates are women, and yet it's still 80-20 when you get to these higher level positions. So one concern about AI is that if you go in there and you say, okay, here's our workforce, we have 100 executives, 95 of them are white men, and we have 5 diverse executives. These are the executives that have done well. The concern is that the AI will go in there and say, oh, well, you have to be a white male to be a good executive because 95% of the time,
exactly.
It's a white male.
Right.
And so you need to make sure your AI is understanding
right.
in some way that there's been historic discrimination, that the availability in this area, because of this historic discrimination, it may have been 95% men 30 years ago, but not anymore. And that you need to look at availability in the whole workforce. And you need to make sure that you're not overweighting the demographic, or weighting at all, frankly, the demographic characteristics of those individuals in that position when you're looking for comparators or examples that you want to find in the workforce generally. You need to make sure that your AI is not biased towards men or towards whites or toward any group, frankly. That's really where regulators, where the New York AI law is concerned. So what you want to ask a company, and this is what we do on the Eightfold AI Ethics Council, is, okay, so what are we doing to see if there's any sort of algorithmic bias? So if 50 men and 50 women apply for the same position, and they have the same skills, same qualifications, so you compare two sort of equal groups, you switch their gender, you see if that makes a difference. You switch their race, you see if that makes a difference. There's a lot of different ways to test for bias, but that's one, for example. You want to make sure that you're looking to see if race or gender is changing a score or is changing an outcome. And to the extent it is, you need to eliminate that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important because AI does have the ability to amplify bias. I mean, it's learning from the information it's being given, right? So
Yes.
if it's learning from your culture, from your individual organization, that a certain situation is the case, then it's just going to keep perpetuating that, right?
Sure, like
So you have to teach it, no, actually, this situation is in play because of a unique circumstance. It's not something that you should continue to facilitate.
Yeah, like if you ask AI, for example, if you
Right.
gave AI 10 individuals, 5
Yeah.
men, 5 women, who are leaders in our country, and asked who would be the best president of these 10, you don't want the AI looking at and saying, oh, well, every president has been a man.
Right.
Many presidents are this tall, which can sometimes be harmful to women.
Exactly.
If you say like, oh, you got to be over 6 feet, you
Right.
often hear that about presidents.
Yeah.
Things like that can correlate
Yeah.
with gender, or correlate, for example, without being someone without a disability.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that you're not looking at these correlative factors that really are not job related. How tall you are, your gender doesn't make you a good president.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I just use that as an example because it's an example where we've never had a woman president. Hopefully we will soon. But there are positions like that in corporate America where there have been very few women or very few people of color in those positions, and we need to make sure that the AI is not amplifying that, as you mentioned. And that's why you want an AI ethics council. That's why you want testing and auditing. But in the long run, let me tell you something. If you ask most Americans, and you still see this, who would be a good next president, there's still a percentage of Americans who say that a woman shouldn't be president, believe it or not. And that's very sad, that still exists in this country. But there is still bias. People have bias. That's why if you can remove the bias from the machine, from the AI, which you can, and which will certainly be, I think, common in the next few years because of all these laws and regulators. If there is no bias, it's better. It will tell you, no, these 3 women would be the best next president, or best next CEO, or best next programmer,
Right.
whatever it may be.
So speaking of the New York City AI law, do you think regulations like this are going to become more widespread? And if so, how should employers get ahead of this? How should they prepare for something like this coming to their city or state?
Well, one, I wouldn't run away from AI. I would embrace it now. I would start embracing it, become familiar with it, make sure your HR leadership is familiar with it, is trained on it, is learning about AI. Use ChatGPT. I asked ChatGPT today about the impact I asked it actually very bluntly. I said, is AI, could it be positive for equal employment opportunity and the elimination of discrimination? It gave me a very good answer. It said,
Wasn't bad.
yes, it could be, and for the reasons I've given you, but it also said, but there are concerns that it could amplify bias, and it was a fairly comprehensive answer. It was a good answer. I use AI my daughter is profoundly autistic. She has difficulty communicating. I've been using AI with her to help her to communicate, with telling the AI about my daughter, and this was suggested to me by someone in the disability field, where I tell AI about my daughter, and I'll ask it questions, and I'll say, well, my daughter said this, 1 or 2 word response. What could she mean by that? Can you elaborate on her behalf? And then I'll show it to my daughter. Do you agree with that? Do you not agree? And over time, I found it to be very useful in it suggesting to me things that my daughter would like to do, and it helps her to be able to communicate. So anyway, there's so many uses of AI, but it's important for your workforce to become more comfortable with it. If you tell them, don't use AI, period, ever, one, they're still going to use it.
Right.
And frankly, it's going to become impossible not to use it because it's going to be embedded
Right.
in search engines,
And everything.
generative AI. But you want to embrace that now. And then the second thing is the AI companies that you utilize, you need to be asking them, do you have an AI ethics council? If we get audited and by OFCCP or the EOC or any sort of government entity, and they ask us, why is there an adverse impact here based on race? Can you explain it to us in a job-related way? Is the AI going to be able to do that? Or are you going to be left telling the regulator, well, it's a black box. We don't know exactly why. We're not certain if it's neutral, but they tell us it is. That's not where you want to be. Yeah. You want to be with an AI company that's going to help you if you get audited and be able to defend the AI as being job-related.
Yeah, and by the way, that's a skill set. When people always say, oh, we're going to automate everything, the AI will take care of that. That's a human skill set, being able to explain to decision makers why the AI is making the calls that it makes. That's a job that needs to be created when you deploy AI within your organization. So new human skill set that needs to be brought to the table. All right, so you mentioned, Craig, that many people are still afraid of AI. Granted, that's probably not who's in our audience today. But the people who are in our audience today do need to sell AI internally as being a force for good. So what leadership and communication strategies need to be in place in order to come away from a conference like this and say, we absolutely have to be supporting Eightfold, be supporting platforms and talent intelligence in our organization and being able to drive it forward?
Yeah, so from the top down, and I think it's important to convey the message that we're embracing AI, that we're at the forefront of new technology in our organization. It's same with the dawn of the internet. Can you imagine companies now, looking back, that refuse to use the internet in commerce or to have a web page or things like that? It just doesn't work. Or refuse to use Google or search engines or Bing to be able to search things. It doesn't work. So it's the same with AI. We're all going to be utilizing it in our daily lives, just like our phones. It'll probably be embedded in our phones. It's going to be helpful to us in being able to generate documents, generate schedules, all sorts of things, and to show from the top down that you embrace that. Those companies that do that are going to be at the forefront. And then understanding, always including, though, never forgetting equal employment opportunity or fairness, saying we also recognize some of the concerns that exist about AI, which are legitimate, and we are on top of that. We have an AI ethics council. We have a group of a task force that are focused on AI to make sure that people are not left behind. So yes, we're going to be using AI to try to identify individuals in the workplace who could be able to advance, maybe for, in particular positions or opportunities. But look, if you sort of having an open door policy, if you feel that there's a concern that you need an accommodation or that the AI is not not identifying you, for example, feel free to reach out to this group and we'll, it's that sort of engagement that we're going to use AI. We believe it's going to be helpful to you, but we recognize the concerns and we have a task force that's dedicated to addressing it. And then same with, in terms of AI and employment, like Eightfold, it's the exact same thing. Saying that we're using AI to identify talent, it's job related, we're identifying the best workers, they stay longer at the organization, all these positive things that are helpful from using AI, but that also we recognize that AI can be a concern. We don't want people to be left out. If you're an individual with a disability and you're applying, you can ask for an accommodation related to the AI. Now, that doesn't really apply so much to Eightfold because it's looking at skills, but there are some AI out there which will, as you all know, which will interview you. You'll be interviewed, for example, and it'll look at your facial expressions, your eye contact. It may look at how you speak or how you respond to questions. Sometimes this is why the EOC published a whole set of guidelines related to AI in equal employment opportunity. It basically said, well, let's say you're someone with autism and it's hard for you to give eye contact, or you have anxiety disorder and you get anxious when you are in an interview where you're being interviewed by an AI or you're looking into you're being taped or something like that, and you need to be able to request accommodation so that maybe that part of the employment process will be done separately or in a different way, or at least they'll recognize that if you don't have eye contact, or if you take more time to answer questions, or if you need to ask for breaks, that won't be held against you in the way that your interview is scored. I mean, you need to be able to request those sort of accommodations for some types of AI if your disability could be impacted by the AI. So, I mean, these are things that you have to be thinking about as an organization.
Yeah, I think all good points of advice. We have time for a couple of questions from the audience. would anyone like to chime in with some thoughts for Craig?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Liz. I was thinking about the comments from Ashutosh around the advancement, over the next 5 years, the pace of technological advancement. And then I also think about some of the regulators that I've seen during congressional hearings when we think about TikTok a few weeks back. I'm not convinced that regulators are able to keep up with the technological advancements. And so what are we doing, or what are they doing to help speed up that pace? Because with the growth that we're expecting, I'm not sure that regulators can even speak to some of what's going on now. So I'd be keen to get your thoughts on that.
Sure. I don't think regulators have kept up. I don't think they will. It reminds me of other areas. I used to be a local government attorney. And I remember when Uber and Lyft came into Miami-Dade County, and they were like, we're not letting anyone use Uber and Lyft, and we're going to fine you if you do. And that didn't work. I mean, people used Uber and Lyft, and they ultimately didn't fine them. So that's improved our lives to be able to have ride sharing, for example. It's the same thing with artificial intelligence. People are going to use artificial intelligence. You can't prevent them from using it as a regulator. We should be using it in employment. We've seen that if you don't use AI and you use human decision makers, it leads to 80% men, 20% women in a lot of these positions, which is very harmful to the country because we're underutilizing our talent. And it's the same for any protected group, for African Americans, for Hispanics, for Asians, for Native Americans, for LGBTQ plus employees, for women of color, and for people with disabilities. All of those groups are underutilized in the workforce because of historic discrimination, and AI is a way to address that. And it's a neutral tool, but it's a positive tool in the sense that when you ensure its neutrality, and frankly, if it's not neutral, why are you using it for business either? The whole purpose of using AI is to identify the top talent in a neutral way, not in a biased way. But as long as you're using it for that purpose, and you're testing to see if there's adverse impact, and you're addressing it over time, that's what regulators should want. And that's what regulators should be enforcing. So I'll tell you, on the AI Ethics Council for Eightfold has always told us that they want more regulation, that they care about regulation, that they view it as a way for Eightfold to be at the lead among artificial intelligence companies, because Eightfold's going to comply. And other companies that don't comply are going to go away, because it's too much risk for companies to use an AI a platform that doesn't meet the regulatory guidelines that are set. But at the same time, for regulators, they need to be open to AI. In the long run, it's going to be beneficial for equal employment opportunity. It has to be. One thing I like to often say, again, from my local government days, is this: we had the same discussion about autonomous vehicles. Oh, well, are autonomous vehicles going to be harmful? Are they going to? And yes, there are individual cases where an autonomous vehicle can be harmful. But in 20 or 30 years, everyone's going to be an autonomous vehicle, and to get a driver's license, you're going to have to, meet probably a very special test, because it's going to increase risk and liability for everybody. It's the same thing with AI. If you're still letting humans do the entire process of hiring in 5 years, in 10 years, knowing that there is unconscious bias, knowing that, and knowing that there's affinity bias, anchoring bias, all these biases, and still not using AI, which can be tested for neutrality, you're going to be asking for liability. That's what's going to happen. And you're going to be asked, why are you not using AI when you know that there's unconscious bias in the workforce?
We would like to thank you, Craig, for
Thank you.
taking the time to chat with us today.